over at BangTheBook.com. We are your one-stop shop for sports betting news and information. Lots of good things going on over there right now, as always, including daily college basketball picks from Kyle Hunter, daily NHL picks from Parker Michaels, daily NBA first half and full game and totals picks from Alan Moody, preview of the Daytona 500 from me, weekly golf previews for all the events that are going on. We've got weekly UFC previews from Christian Pino, who will also join us on tomorrow's edition of Bang the Book Radio. We got a ton of stuff going on over at the website right now. Please make sure you check it all out. And, of course, check out the promo code over at DSI Sportsbook, BTB and the number 200, 100% deposit match bonus for the Sportsbook, 100% deposit match bonus for the live casino at BetDSI. It's only a game until you bet it. Then finally, check out our Bang the Book YouTube page on a daily basis. Good stuff up weekly from Brian Blessing, Kyle Hunter, daily videos from me Monday through Friday. So good things going on over at our Bang the Book YouTube page. Two guests on the program here today. We start things off with professional handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. Brad, how's it going today, man?
That's going well. How you doing on this fine Thursday?
Doing well, buddy. Appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. And, one thing that we try to do, maybe you could call it a shtick, I don't know, but we try to talk college football on all of the segments that you come on here with Bang the Book Radio. And, as we were going over some talking points here for the show today, you mentioned that a pretty influential media member out there in the college football world is starting to post some 2019 season preparation stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to be, if you want to have a clue on what's happening with college football and at least get a gist of, maybe not an all-in-all Vegas take on it, but if you're a little bored this time of year wondering what to do, a guy by the name of Bill Connelly at SB Nation has already started up his 2019 preview, and he's very analytical driven and, advanced stat metrics and really does a decent job. I mean, writes thousands of words on all 130 teams in college football. Starts it in February, ends it in August. And, at least for my purposes, while I like to read most of his previews, if I can get to all of them, and they do take a little bit of time each and every day to read. But, one thing that he does release is his opening power ratings. So that's, if you're looking to come up with a power rating in the off season, I can tell you, pull behind the curtain a little bit. I mean, I use his formula, his power ratings go into mine. Are they an end-all as far as my power ratings? No, but they might represent like 10% of what my preseason power ratings are because, he has some strengths that I don't have, and some of the strengths being, the advanced metrics there, the analytics, isolation plays and explosiveness plays, stuff that just doesn't, go into my power ratings, but by including his set, I obviously, take that under consideration. So his name's Bill Connelly. He's already halfway through the MAC conference, and it's good stuff. And if you want some good reading in the off season for the next 6 months, I'd highly recommend him.
Well, and these resources are very important because, I'm obviously a big Major League Baseball guy, and I'm working on my MLB betting guide for this season with my 30-season win total previews, and then I'll do some more stuff on more of an individual and team level basis in the month of March. But, PECOTA projections came out at Baseball Prospectus last week or 2 weeks ago. Those shaped the MLB season win total market. I thought that the numbers were much tighter before PECOTA came out, and it actually gave me some situations where I think there are values going over or under team season win totals. But it's something that shapes the market. It's something that has a lot of an impact. When you look at this accelerated timeline for college football that you and I have already talked about here, Phil Steele comes out, late June, early July. Lindy's comes out in, maybe late May, early June, something like that. Season win totals are already out. Some games of the year lines are already out. So Connelly is going to be a really good resource for you, whether you agree with him or not. Getting that, frame of reference, as you mentioned, very important with this accelerated timeline because I don't think somebody like Phil is going to, adjust the timeline for his magazine. It's going to come out when it comes out, and it won't be available for those that want to hit those early numbers.
I mean, that's an excellent point. Absolutely. It used to be good because, usually the golden nugget was first right around 4th of July weekend. the Game of the Year lines and whatnot would come out, and that's basically when a lot of college lines, whether it be season win totals, would come out in the marketplace. And, I would say the most important, as far as betting off-season college football, the most important resource was Phil's magazine. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to get at these numbers, Phil's magazine isn't out, and it's happening on Memorial Day weekend, and you don't even have, in some cases, the Athlons and the Lindys are just barely coming out at that point. I think you're right. If you're going to ask me power ratings wise, I still think it's important for you guys to come up with your own. But if you just want to read up on teams, Bill's not going to be all the way through every team at that point. But one thing that he will have done, he'll have all the Group of 5 conferences done and previewed by that point. So at least you'll have a gist on those teams that there aren't a lot of information out there to begin with. So, yeah, I would say he's the most important factor with the accelerated college football betting off season. So, yeah, if you want to be serious about betting it, I would definitely use him, and I do use him as some of my consideration. But I also use my eye test. I try to watch 50 or 60 spring games. I read up on teams, and I also got a pretty good feel on how to come up with a power rating on a team. So, he's vital, and you're exactly right. He's become even more vital here in the last 3-4 years.
Well, and of course, obviously, you're somebody who is a professional full-time handicapper and bettor. So, you do have a lot of, data in place. I'm sure the spreadsheets that you have are quite extensive for people that are out there that maybe want to get into doing their own power ratings or, maybe don't have any and just sort of want to start to read up. That's where somebody like Connelly is critically important for you. So, a good resource and a good opening talking point here for this Thursday edition of Bang the Book Radio. The All-Star game in the NBA, as we transition over to the hardwood here, do you find betting angles with this thing? I mean, are you betting some stuff here over the weekend, or do you just sort of use it as, kind of a here to where, you can do some things with teams coming out of the break?
Yeah, a little of both. Now, I'll start off first with the game. Didn't find as much value, but, I mean, obviously there were some rule changes last year on how the teams were selected. I mean, it's no longer East versus West. You had the draft last year. You had, Team LeBron versus Team Steph Curry. And to me, it looked much more like a competitive game, like it meant a little bit more. And where do we see that as far as, a little bit more intensity? Where does that come up and show in the final score, the box score? It came in total points. I mean, keep in mind, prior to last year, the NBA All-Star, defense has always been optional. I would say, in the previous 4 years, forget defense didn't even show up at all. It wasn't optional at any point in the games. Previous 4 years, average total score in the games, combined points, 345 points per game. Last year, different rules changes, a little bit more competitiveness. With the two key players, the captain's draft, and we only had 293 points total. Sharps bet the total last year like 340 down to 333, still cashed by 40 points. So I guess what I'm intrigued is to see what that total is going to come out at this year. I think anything, 305 or above, I think you got a solid bet on the under. And I'm also anxious. If you just look at the rosters, say what you want about LeBron James, but he put on the GM hat, and at least as far as I'm concerned, took it to school to Giannis, the Greek freak. I think very unbalanced rosters from a talent aspect here. I would be absolutely stunned if Team LeBron isn't a 4 or 5 point favorite. So that's what I'm looking at on the actual game to take advantage of. Coming out of the break, obviously you got teams tanking. That was usually one where it was a starting point for teams to tank. The problem is in the NBA, we've already got 3 or 4 teams already started that process of tanking. And look, hindsight's always going to be 20/20, but sometimes and put this in your back pocket for future years. But if you got teams that final game right before the All-Star break, if it's a team that's more prone to maybe having days type games off, that they're not always max motivated, a la Golden State type of team. Sometimes you get that last day of school type of mentality in the final game right before the All-Star break. And sometimes you can find some value, and obviously Golden State last night outright upset by the Blazers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a game on the card tonight where you've got the Knicks and the Hawks. And the Hawks, I mean, this number opened 6.5, and they're up to 8.5 already. And the idea of laying 8.5 with Atlanta is downright terrifying. And yet, I mean, I see no way in hell the Knicks show up tonight. So, there are some angles you can look at, and especially, too, as you mentioned, I mean, when you look at the schedule here, some teams have played – a lot of teams have basically played 58, 59 games. I don't think anybody's played 60 yet. 3 24-game sprint now to the end of the regular season. So if you want to tank, you got to do it immediately. And if you want to make that playoff push, you got to do it immediately. So that'll make the first week after the All-Star break really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you can find some value. Again, the problem is because the All-Star break doesn't fall at the midway point. I mean, not even close to it. As you got teams that have already started the tanking process, the Knicks being one of them. So it's a little bit differently than I would say what it was 7, 8, 10 years ago. But, you're going to be know this. You're going to be paying a premium against those teams that are tanking, and you're also going to be paying a premium on teams that have playoff need. So the market's going to account for it in some instances. Over accounts for it. You're paying a premium on a team like, say, the Lakers. Absolutely got to come out of the All-Star break. If they want to make the playoffs, they got to come out with their hair on fire. Don't think for 1 second that you're not going to be paying a premium on a team like the Lakers. So be very careful with that. A lot of times the market over accounts for that, and you can find some value on the other side.
That's an excellent point, especially, too, because you look at the Lakers. I mean, they have the best player on the planet, LeBron James, but they're also not a very good team. I mean, obviously the metrics with LeBron on the floor are significantly different than the metrics without LeBron on the floor, but they're just not a great team, which is another reason why they're kind of in this position. But they're going to be priced as if they're, as you mentioned, one of the upper echelon teams in the NBA here, whereas, teams like Miami or Orlando maybe, Orlando hasn't made the playoffs in a little while. They're a team that may have that sense of urgency, and they're not a very good team. So maybe their inflation, if it exists at all, is very nominal. So those are good angles to consider.
Yeah, no question about it. Now, I'm not going to parade around here as an NBA expert by any stretch of the imagination like I am in the college hoop side, but I can tell you my inner circle of guys, those are a couple of key points, guys that are betting on this type of stuff for a living. That's a couple of, the topic points that they're looking at to take advantage of it down the home stretch here.
All right, so let's stay on the hardwood but transition over to the college basketball side of things here. And a few days ago, and I was kind of out of the loop over the weekend, but a few days ago, the NCAA selection revealed the top 16 seeds, the top 4 seeds in each region here in the East region: Duke, Michigan, Marquette, Iowa State; South region, Tennessee, North Carolina, Purdue, Nevada; Midwest, Virginia, Kentucky, Houston, Wisconsin; West, Gonzaga, Michigan State, Kansas, and Louisville, who, obviously if Louisville had been able to finish off the game against Duke, perception would be a little bit different about them. But what do you think here about these top 16 teams according to the tournament committee?
Well, first and foremost, I think they did a pretty solid job. I mean, let's just start at the top. I mean, the AP poll has Tennessee number 1. I mean, I don't know if anyone that's doing this even casually thinks for 1 second that Tennessee's actually the best team in the country. If you're doing a power rating, it's obviously Duke, who's the best team in the country. And even though Duke has one more loss than Tennessee, they appropriately put the Blue Devils in that number 1 slot, because then not only did they put the seeds as far as region goes, but they also, stack ranked everyone, 1 through 16. And, having Duke number 1, I thought was a good move by at least the tournament committee. I don't have a lot of qualms, beefs about it except 2. I think number 10, Kansas at number 10, clearly overrated. I don't think anyone that's doing a power rating has the Jayhawks. Forget the top 10. I don't think anyone has them in the top 16. At this point, missing 3 of their top 7 players now. Now it'll be interesting to see if they get a couple of those guys back. It's possible they do so. Right now, Kansas is playing 4 freshmen. But to put in perspective, I mean, a TCU team that's an average Big 12 team at best was just laying the other night 3 points to Kansas at home. meaning that, Kansas is probably only 1 point better than TCU on a neutral. Kansas won the game in overtime, but that just goes to show you where Vegas considers Kansas and nowhere near in the top 10. So I thought that was a reach by the NCAA Tournament Committee. And believe it or not, I think the biggest omission, defending national champs, Villanova. I mean, are you kidding me? I think Villanova's a top 10 caliber team. And, again, to put in perspective, what does Vegas think, or at least the market think about Villanova? One of their most recent games, they're at Marquette, the Wildcats, and they're catching 2 points on the road. Keep in mind, a big game like brand new, beautiful facility there. That's 3.5, 4 points of home court advantage for Marquette, meaning on a neutral floor, Villanova's 1.5, 2 points better than Marquette, who's ranked number 12 in the March Madness Committee's early rankings. So Kansas is overrated. I think Villanova not being included, at least among the top 4 seeds, was the biggest omission. Other than that, they did a decent job.
Well, and what do you think that this means going forward? We talk about how the end of college football and the end of the Super Bowl brings some new money into the college basketball market. Are you expecting there to be some inflation then on these teams? They're already buzzworthy anyway, but does this kind of add more fuel to that fire?
Well, I'll use the example of Duke. I don't think Duke's been inflated too much here. Keep in mind, even though Duke's considered historically great as far as the futures markets, the second biggest favorite this time of year in the last decade, only Kentucky in 2015 was a bigger favorite. But, Duke was just a 2-point underdog over the weekend at Virginia. I thought that was a very fair line. That's exactly where my power ratings had it. However, after beating and running Duke, or running Virginia out of the building there, for the first time in a while, I thought you were paying a decent premium on a Duke game. It opened 6 at Louisville. That's about where my power ratings had it. And I saw the market bet Duke up to 8.5. 8.5. And to me, that was the first time, at least in a while, that you were paying a significant premium on Duke, by a bucket or so. And we saw how that game went down. And I guess my biggest takeaway is, the public, even though they might have had a losing ticket on Duke, the biggest storyline coming out of the game, oh, wow, what a great performance by Duke. Somehow to rally from 23 points down with 9 minutes left, I don't think the public's going to downgrade Duke, even though they lost a ticket with them, like they should have. Kind of a coin flip game where Duke should have lost outright. So I think there'll be some value there. And then, any team. I saw Michigan, a very public side. They're number 6 in the committee rankings. I think Michigan State has proven to be the best team in the Big Ten. Outside of a 3-game slump, Sparty's been relatively consistent. The public's all over Michigan the other night against Penn State. I think the sharper wise guys were on the other side of that one, and Michigan loses outright. So I guess my biggest takeaway is you're going to be paying a premium on a lot of these teams. And number one is because the public's flooding into the market for the first time this year on college hoops.
Well, that was one of the things we talked about yesterday with Wes Reynolds, is that we were sort of, breaking down some of these recent results. And yeah, there's a little bit of recency bias that factors into the equation, but it also feels like this is that time of year when those elite teams that, have a sign on their back every single time they take the floor, they do tend to run into some hiccups in mid-February. It just kind of is the nature of the college basketball schedule. So, I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm looking for that. I don't want to say that I'm, aligning myself with that, what I perceive to be a live underdog in a lot of these situations, but it is something you want to consider here, where it's not just the price inflation why these teams are failing to cover some numbers or, even getting upset. It's just that it's hard to be the best game after game after game when you get everybody's best effort.
Absolutely. And you got some very balanced conferences. I think the Big Ten's relatively deep. I think the Big 12 is deep as well. Obviously the ACC's up there, and the SEC's much improved compared to what they were, 5-6 years ago. The SEC conference has made leaps and bounds. So, there hasn't been, definite clear separation. And you're going to get tripped up this time of year, a time or two. And a lot of people overreact to that. A lot of teams, it's not like football where you lose a game or two and you're completely out of it. You see teams, even the elite teams, have maybe even a couple games slumping from what I've seen, is the market overreacts to that couple game slump, and sometimes you can find some value on a team that was pricey. You're no longer pricey, and then you can find some value. So there's no question about it. It's a good time of year. And one more point I want to throw out there. It's a little early yet, but something to keep in your back pocket from maybe, you got to wait about 7 to 10 days. But you're speaking of pricey, teams you're going to be paying a premium on, bubble teams. That's going to start becoming a factor. Not necessarily this week, but next week, late February, and certainly early March. I see it year after year. Teams that need a win, that's getting a lot of times overly priced in the marketplace, and most of the time those teams aren't very good to begin with, and now you're laying a premium with them.
That's an excellent point. I mean, that's something that we talk about, when it comes to bowl season in college football. Teams are sitting there with 5 wins. Oh, this is a must-win. They have to win this game so they can get to a bowl game. Well, they're in that position because they're not very good. So, why would you want to pay must-win inflation on a team that's just, not particularly good? So that's definitely something you want to keep in mind here at this time of the year as well. And one other point, and we're a little bit early for this too. Actually, Conference USA actually plays its last conference game on Saturday, which is kind of insane. But, teams that are in one-bid leagues where their one shot is to win the conference tournament, the teams towards the bottom of the standings, or maybe the teams that absolutely have to finish in the top 10 or something just to get into the.
No doubt about it. And you're going to see that in a lot of cases some rooms for opportunity a little bit there. And I'll one more point, and I know I'm going a little off topic here, but look at some of the conference schedules here coming down the stretch, because a lot of them are uneven. And, the Big Ten's gone to, some teams are playing 3 games a week, some are playing 1. Those when you get into the grind of the season, you can take advantage of some of these teams that in certain scheduling spots are really up against it, or Pac-12 is very home-away oriented, and, a team it could be playing 3 or 4 on the road and then finally had their first home game in the first, in the last 3 weeks or so. So, and that's something, when we talk about the grind of the season, we can take advantage of it. You're right. There's so many different conferences that have different things. The fact that Conference USA, do you know the reason why they did that this year? I've been trying to get to the heart of that. Why did they do that this year?
I have no idea. I mean, there were teams playing 5 games in like 8 or 9 days. It was silly.
Yeah, I just, if to get a jump on it, I just don't understand how that benefits the league. So I haven't gotten a good answer from pretty much anyone. It's been a pretty negative, and it'll be interesting to see. Not that Conference USA is going to be a multiple bid league; they're only going to be a one big league bid. But when it comes to CBI, CIT, it'll be interesting to see how those teams react when they've had significant time off in between games.
And I'm actually looking at this, and maybe this is a typo. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong thing. I don't think I am. But as I mentioned, Conference USA, their last regular season game this weekend, their conference tournament, this can't possibly be right. It's March 13th through the 16th? That can't possibly be right, can it?
No, it can't be. But I've come across it with you as well, man. I've also the schedules can't be that. It just can't. But I've come across a couple different sources that have that exact same schedule.
That is unbelievable. Well, Selection Sunday is not until March 17th. So March Madness is a little bit later here this year. Usually we see it start around the St. Patrick's weekend. Does go a little bit later here. And I've seen 2 sources now. The Conference USA's conference tournament, March 13th through the 16th. So these guys are off for 3.5, 4 weeks before they play again. Insanity. Anyway, I want to touch on some futures value here for a second. You mentioned Duke as the pretty overwhelming favorite here at this point in time. Gonzaga, the second favorite. I'm just pulling these from 5 Dimes because I happen to have it up. Any worries about them being in the West Coast Conference? Because that's always a talking point year in and year out.
The West Coast, obviously doesn't have that second good team like it's St. Mary's. In most seasons, St. Mary's way down this year. But, I think on the whole, it's a little bit better. San Diego's better than what they've been. San Francisco's better than what they've been. I don't have that many concerns. Why? I mean, at least give Gonzaga credit. I mean, they went out in non-conference play, and they have played Duke. They have played North Carolina. They have played Tennessee. I don't have that many concerns. As soon as Gonzaga, obviously they had issues, making it to the Final Four and breaking through. But once they made the national championship game a couple years ago and had the officiating been a little bit better, might have won the national championship. I think that alleviated a lot of people's concerns. Non-conference schedule for Gonzaga was really good. And look, I mean, I get it that, people can worry about the schedule that they played so far, but at least Vegas and the market takes that under consideration. And, I mean, these numbers are astronomical. In their last 14 games, Gonzaga is obviously 14-0. They're 11-3 against the number. Average point spread, Gonzaga a 24-point favorite on average, a 24-point favorite. They've been laying 24 points per game, and yet the average cover in the last 14 games is by 11 points per game. They're beating their opponents by 35 points per game. I don't care what conference you're in. You got to respect that over a 14-game sample size. That's really, really impressive. And the fact that they've already competed quite nicely in the non-conference action, I don't have any concerns really about Gonzaga. I think if you don't have them in your power rating in the top 5, I think you're making a mistake.
Well, and again, I'm just pulling these from 5 Dimes. You certainly want to shop around for the best odds that are out there. Every dollar matters in the futures market, especially from a hedging standpoint, especially with the format of the NCAA tournament. Tennessee, 3rd on the board, a little better than 8-1. Kentucky, 5th on the board, 11-1. Those two teams play each other this weekend, Brad.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a big game that's changed up a little bit with at least the dynamics with Kentucky going down at home, maybe a little bit of look ahead for them. They're playing a really good LSU team. They shouldn't have been looking ahead, and they lose outright at home. Tough seeing Kentucky losing back-to-back games at home, but Kentucky, believe it or not, even though Tennessee's number 1, I still expect Kentucky to be right around a 3-point favorite. And you look historically, at least under John Calipari, I mean, Kentucky's been a good fade team as far as at home. You're paying a premium. I think they've only covered like 48% of their home games if you're just blindly betting on Kentucky at home in the Calipari era. But when they're laying like 5 points or less, or they're in the underdog role at home, they're actually like a 62% team as far as covering the spread. So, and that'll be the case here with Kentucky, laying a short number and kind of a must-win mode. I know Tennessee's got the experience edge over the Wildcats, but man, it's tough for me to seeing this Kentucky team who had won 10 straight prior to the LSU game, and we're on a 7-0-1 ATS mark. I'm going to be leaning Kentucky as long as I'm not laying more than 4.5 points. I think the number will come 3, and I'll be on Kentucky in that one.
Iowa State, a team that was in the top 16 in that committee reveal, they're 14th on the odds board now, a little better than 50-1 in the 52-1 range. They play Kansas State this weekend, who's 16th, at least over at 5 Dimes at 60-1. That's an interesting little game there in Manhattan on Saturday.
It is, and you talk about, I have a futures ticket that I just bet. I bet Kansas State 60-1. I think you could have the best team in the Big 12 by far in Kansas State, not being priced like. If Kansas State continues to play like they have been, 8 straight wins and covers in Big 12 play, I think it's not unlikely that the Kansas State doesn't get like a 2 seed. And I get a 2 seed. That was a team that went to the Elite 8 last year, returned their top 7 players from that team that went to the Elite 8. And best team in a pretty balanced conference of Big 12, I think that could get a 2 seed. Of course, I'll take 60-1. Obviously, it's always going to depend on the bracket, but I think Kansas State's been mispriced. And why? Dean Wade, their center, missed 6 games. Kansas State struggled. They were already struggling to begin with, but since his return, again, in Big 12 play, 8 straight wins and covers in conference play, and their last couple of games have been very impressive. I mean, finally break through and beat their rival Kansas, go on the road to beat a Baylor team that was hot, although Baylor was a little shorthanded. And then I think in another trap game, Texas on the road, Kansas State got the win and cover there outright. I think the line's going to come shorter than what a lot of people think. I think it'll be right around 2.5, 3 points, Kansas State being favored. And I'm going to lay it with the Wildcats. That's one team I've really isolated and made some money with in the last 2-3 weeks. I think Kansas State's one of the more underrated teams in the country. And if there's one weakness, I love Ken Pom. Use Ken Pom all the time. The market uses Ken Pom religiously. But if there's one weakness to Ken Pom, his power ratings are full season. They encompass the full season, and they don't always properly account for teams that had injury issues. And right now, Kansas State being number 25, I think they're underrated at number 25. I think right now I can make a case in the last couple of weeks, Kansas State is playing like a top 10 team value on the Wildcats in the futures market and upcoming on Saturday.
One other game to look at on Saturday, we'll also tie this one into the futures market a little bit. Maryland and Michigan. This is a very early noon tip-off up there in Ann Arbor. Michigan's in the 12.5 to 1 range to win the national championship. Maryland, despite being a top 25 team here, and they will, even with a loss here against Michigan, likely move up after beating Purdue when the rankings come out again next week. They're 100 to 1 out there in the market. So not a whole lot of respect for the Terps right now.
No, there is in the marketplace, and the market was against the Terps in that most recent game against Purdue, where the market bet Purdue up to like a 2.5-point road favorite, and Maryland had a bad first half and a really good second half. So that was a really impressive win over a Purdue team that won 8 straight. Yeah, 100 to 1, I would say slight value there with a Maryland team that's been relatively hot. The two of their only losses in Big Ten play, on the road to Michigan State, on the road to Wisconsin. There's nothing to sneeze at there. The big slip up for them was obviously the neutral site game at MSG against Illinois. But, looking at their schedule, it's relatively tough starting with this Michigan game. And then they're also on the road against Iowa. If they somehow could steal one of those two games, especially if it's the Michigan game on Saturday, I don't expect it. I think Maryland will probably be a 7-8 point road dog. Michigan coming off the upset loss at Penn State, it should be laser focused looking at that one. But, here's a good lesson. That these futures markets are a little slow and a lot of times to react in college hoops. It's not like college football where a team gets almost adjusted immediately. You can get at this Saturday night. If Maryland goes on the road and beats Michigan and you can find 100 to 1, that number might be 60 to 1 come Monday. So that's one that you might want to take advantage of. Just read your scores. Maryland really overperforms and beats Michigan. That's opportunity to take advantage. Markets are really slow. I use this example. Michigan, the day of the Big Ten championship game last year, a game that they would go on to beat Purdue and claim the Big Ten tournament championship, you could still get Michigan 40 to 1 to win it all last year. And obviously Michigan made it all the way to the championship game. Shop around first and foremost because so many books had different odds, and then also fully note that you can take advantage of them, the day of the game. They lead these lines up here, and if there's a big-time disparate result, take advantage of it and bet it.
Are there any other futures prices that do interest you right now?
It's tough because, look, Duke is an overwhelming favorite, and after watching what they did to Virginia last Saturday, it's tough not, at least considering them. And I think teams, if you're asking me what are the legitimate teams that can win it all, Gonzaga's up there, Kentucky's up there, Tennessee's up there. I think there'll be value in a few weeks because sometimes what we see, I just use Michigan. They were a team that did, won their final, 10, 12 games of the regular season and were hitting their stride. I guess I find that oftentimes value right before the conference tournament, those teams that are really surging down at the end of the regular season have kicked it up a notch. A lot of times I find value there late February, early March in the futures market. Still, we got 2-3 weeks here, and obviously you can get caught red-handed, even though it's later in the season with a key injury or whatnot. I prefer to really get involved right before conference tournaments. And again, the markets are so slow to adjust. You can even find some great value during conference tournament.
Any other games on Saturday besides the big ones that we mentioned that pique your interest?
Yeah, looking at games that we didn't necessarily go over. Well, I'll tell you what, an interesting game. I'll take it local, and it's actually on Friday night. It'll be very interesting to see how Buffalo, who's been struggling covering the number in big games on the road in conference play, lost outright to Bowling Green a few weeks ago, and obviously everyone's circling their calendars as far as teams in that conference. Toledo's probably, by any stretch of the imagination, the second best team in the conference, the MAC, as far as a power rating. Buffalo is going to be a slight favorite tomorrow night. A little bit of a national TV audience, something that Toledo doesn't always get. They get a top 25 team coming in the Savage Hall. Don't be a bit surprised if the Bulls go down tomorrow on Friday. Toledo plus the points would be a lean for me there.
Brad Powers, professional handicapper over at BradPowersSports.com. What's going on at the website right now, man?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of college football, college hoops talk. We are more college based, but still, do the NFL and then take part as far as the NBA goes. If you want the college football newsletter, next issue will come out in March. It'll be a March preview, get you all updated there. That gets sent monthly during the off season, weekly during the season. 57% all-time winning percentage. We're talking a 700-game sample size there. That's $69 for the newsletter. But if you want stuff right now from BP Sports, it's the college basketball VIP service. You get daily emails sent now through the national championship game in early April. Price for that is $199. Again, that's daily VIP service. BradPowersSports.com.
And you can follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7. Brad, as always, brother, a real treat. Thank you so much for joining me. Talk to you again next week.
All right, sounds good, man. Take care.